part of our scientific steering committee, and she is professor at the University of Basel, which is also part of our UCO partnership, the Association of the Universities in the Upper Rhine. So Aya Katschi is professor for international political economy and energy policy, and she works on a lot of different things, including statistics, but also economy and policy making. It's a pleasure to have her here. She will share this session, and thank you for coming here, who are here today. Aya, it's to you now to introduce the first speaker. Please, come.
So thank you, Johannes. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope the first speaker is tech ready. Yes. So this morning, we have the great honor of welcoming Mr. Alistair Hudson. Mr. Hudson is the Scientific Artistic Chairman at the ZKM, or the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe here. So I've heard that you're going to give a talk on the political economy of art. And because of my own research and teaching field, when I hear political economy, I have this inexplicable excitement. And so we're all very much looking forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, thank you. Good morning, alles zusammen, hello. Thank you very much for having me here. I have recently started as director of ZKM in April this year. So I'm rather new to Germany, to Karlsruhe, to this culture. But I think there are kind of some universals as well, which are very apparent. And I'm very honored to be invited to speak here today on this subject. It's a strange world where we sort of have art separated from the rest of the world, and I want to talk a little bit about how maybe art shouldn't be considered as something else as entertainment or a luxury or an extra added value, but something really embedded in the way we think as a society. And so I thought it'd be quite fun to start with actually this fresco from 1339 by Lorenzetti called The Allegory of Good Governance, which is, in the history of art, is quite a famous picture and often quoted, often studied. And in fact, even I think the founding fathers of San Francisco studied it very carefully when they were building the city and building its city halls and borrowed a lot of its images. But essentially, I won't talk about this painting in particular, but what it basically represents is the idea of using art to instruct and to be quite didactic. This is painted in the city halls of Siena. One of the first artworks actually painted not for religion, but for civic good. And it was to instruct people and remind them that the governors are there to serve the governed and not the other way around. That's essentially the idea. And you have the governor, the head of the city, surrounded by all the virtues, advising him to treat his subjects wisely and considerately. This painting was often quoted and used by someone I'm going to talk about a little bit more, which was the English artist, writer, educator, philosopher, polymath, John Ruskin, who basically lived his life throughout the 19th century. In fact, he died in 1900, kind of an allergic reaction to the 20th century, I think. But he's a very interesting character. He's very flawed, very complicated, very complex, but also introduced a lot of ideas in the middle of the 19th century against the grain of what was happening. So John Ruskin really was the voice of consciousness in the 19th century as Britain really raced towards industrialization, as the world raced towards industrialization. This is an etching of Manchester, where I come from, and it was made famous by the writings of Karl Marx and Engels back in the day, where they studied the detrimental effects of industrialization. But John Ruskin was really the public voice. He was an art critic, but he was also, he was, I suppose, in a way, he was a celebrity in many ways because of his opinionated voices on society, where he broke out of the art world. And round about the same time, we had emerging out of industrialization the first exhibitions. Exhibitions are actually quite a new thing if we look at history. Really, this is the Great Exhibition in London of 1851. And really what's happening here is not exhibitions really for the way we think about them now, but this is the public presentation of what is manufactured in Britain by the empire. This is really a statement of the combination of art and technology being presented to the public, one, to fire their imagination and show power and wealth, but also to educate, to show people what is possible, and to encourage people to be involved in this new emerging economy. Manchester had its own version in 1857. It tried to compete with London. It didn't want to miss out. It was the new gold rush city. It was fired by the new industry. And so it decided to make its own great exhibition. And in fact, I think it's on record as the biggest exhibition ever made in the history of the Western world, with this temporary building installed in a park in the middle of Manchester. And so it was really the industrialists of the Industrial Revolution trying to show their power, to show their wealth, to show their importance, and to really put Manchester at the center of the kind of the race to success and the race to a successful economy. And at the same time, because they had this huge exhibition, they invited John Ruskin, Mr. Celebrity, to come and give a lecture on art. And John Ruskin, being a contrary person, didn't really see the point of giving a lecture on art. He had more important business to discuss. And interestingly, the lecture was given at, this is the Royal Manchester Institution for the Promotion of Science, Literature and the Arts. It later became Manchester Art Gallery, which was one of my positions as director. But back then, art galleries didn't exist. Art galleries were institutions where science and the arts were taught together for the working classes. And I think KIT probably has a similar genealogy, founded around about the same time, where it was seen that art and science taught together were for the benefit of society, because you learnt the humanities and you learnt the technology. And this is the way industrialists, capitalists at that time, understood the way to growth and success. But John Ruskin decided to give a lecture over 2 days, each section 3 hours long. There wasn't television in those days or Netflix, so there was a crowd of about 2,000 people coming to hear him speak. And he decided to give a lecture on political economy as his riposte to Adam Smith, who was at that point one of the principal voices in the growing humanity rather than science of economy. And John Ruskin gave a lecture called A Joy Forever, brackets, on the political economy of art. And over these 6 hours, he basically berated the industrialists, the merchants of the city, telling them they'd done it all wrong. That their exhibition was ridiculous. It was vanity. It was not in service of the people. They were not thinking of their subjects. He really then started to, it's a very long lecture and I won't go into detail obviously, but the principal point was they had to think about art in a different way. They had to think about art not as a set of things in the world, pictures on the walls, sculptures, baubles, decorations. They had to think about art as a process. Art as a way of doing something with care and consideration, about good governance of the things around you. And the economy, in its truest sense, is not about money, It is about wealth and wealth of the soul. And economy, in its truest sense, is about good housekeeping, a good operating system for society. And in this, he articulates the idea that art is a way of doing things artfully, that you should do economy artfully, you should do healthcare artfully, you should do housing artfully, you should do science and technology and industry and manufacturing artfully, with care and consideration for the people who you are governing. Interesting, the book, a lecture, 10 years later became this book, Unto This Last, of 1858, which then became rather influential. For one thing, it was picked up by the Labour Party. The foundation of the Labour Party was based on the manifesto that was Unto This Last. And Gandhi in India also received a copy of a book at a railway station famously, and then constructed his vision of post-colonial India on this text. But John Ruskin had a kind of smaller idea at mind. He didn't really want world domination as such. He thought you start in small places. And this is a very interesting model he created in the village of Coniston in the Lake District, in the sort of mountains and lakes of the northern England, which is basically a building he built for the miners. It was a mining village, and he constructed a new version of an institute teaching science and technology, but one in which it had library, bathhouse for the miners, communal dining halls and kitchen, a billiard room, but also collections of art and geology and nature study, so that the workers and the miners and their families would get a complete, holistic, rounded education in how to live well. And this included classes in technologies of the time, such as wood carving. Men, because it was the 19th century, men did wood carving, and women made lace. And through these crafts, they learnt about how to make. This wasn't about making craft, this was about learning to embody your ambitions in reality. And through crafting and making, you learn the transformational skills that allow you to learn the skills to transform your village, your environment, your society, and so on. The influence spread through to William Morris, who some of you may know, who was instrumental in the arts and crafts movement based on Ruskin's texts. An arts and crafts movement which was not an art movement, but actually a political movement, an economic movement, which was about the transformation of society through making. We make society together. And it was through this method of learning through doing that the Victorians tried to transform their society. Didn't necessarily work, but that was the ambition. Gandhi himself also employed these skills, basically creating an education system in India on weaving, spinning, and dyeing. And through all those elements, you learn about chemistry, you learn about biology, you learn about physics, you learn about mathematics through these simple skills. This transformed later in the century into people who picked up on Ruskin's thinking. And it's interesting that Ruskin himself wasn't necessarily changing things himself. It's why he's not so famous. But his disciples, the people that followed him, the people that learnt from him, did. And this is Toynbee Hall in London, where one of Ruskin's students at Oxford set up Toynbee Hall, which the idea was it was in the poor East End of London. And here, university students from Oxford and Cambridge lived and worked alongside the poor of the East End of London, with the idea that they would learn mutually from one another about how to transform society, about how to make a world anew, to make it different, through creating living conditions, living places, working places, artful places, education in science, education in arts, communal dining, housing. And here we have the beginning of the social housing movement coming out of this thinking that comes from art, that doesn't actually come from politics. This was picked up by Jane Addams in Chicago in the late 19th century, working with the philosopher John Dewey to create another version of the settlement, which was Hull House in Chicago, still evident today, now part of the university. where there was also communal dining, housing for women, healthcare, an art gallery, pottery classes. It was a complete compendium, an education for all, an education of how to live again. And this really is the beginning of the social housing movement worldwide. Flip forward here to Germany, this thinking migrates here into the Bauhaus, a holistic education in the first Weimar Bauhaus in the 1920s and 1930s, based on this idea of learning through making and doing. And the unity of, as Walter Gropius says, the unity of technology and art working for society. This is the philosophy that makes this happen. And later in the Dessau version of the Bauhaus, this really transmits not from craft but into industry, working with Junkers, working with the chemical industry. The reason it ended up in Bauhaus was because that's where the industry was. And the artists and architects and designers wanted to use this as the model to transform the way Germany worked. Now I have another Bauhaus myself to work on. This is ZKM. Some of you may have been here this week or coming today or over the weekend. Founded in 1988 as the electronic Bauhaus, the digital Bauhaus, the place of making and learning and doing, which was based in the new emerging technologies of our times, founded on the very same principles that science and technology, if it is to develop, needs to be human-centered. It needs to have the governed at its heart. If you come at the moment, you'll see this exhibition, which was the last exhibition by my predecessor, Peter Weibel, called Renaissance 3.0. And this talks about the new Renaissance we are possibly living in now. The first Renaissance was the Arabian Renaissance, then we had the Italian Renaissance, and now we're living in a new Renaissance. And what that means is really this unity of art and science and technology, where artists and scientists are working together to create tools for other people to use. It's an act of generosity, a gift of people collaborating and making and doing. This is a drawing by Leonardo for a wing, for a flying machine to be used in the military, because Leonardo was not an artist as such. Leonardo effectively invented the idea of the artist. Before that, there weren't artists. In ancient Greece, we have techne, art and science combined. Before that, artists were craftsmen, engineers. There were people working artfully in society. It's really Vasari who changes that thinking. So here we have really Leonardo working as a scientist and as an artist and as an engineer combined. And then that goes fast forward to today's world, where we have the pioneers of computing. This is also in the exhibition. The pioneers of computing in Silicon Valley in the 1950s and 1960s, who were a bunch of geeks. They were artists. They were playing. They were mucking around. They weren't just there for industry. They were there for the knowledge, for the creation, for the making, knowing they were creating a set of tools. And this really is the spirit in which I think ZKM and, in fact, the world should be operating, that we learn to enjoy and we learn to have pleasure in the process of making. And that in itself is a way to do it with care and consideration. And of course, what's happening now is we're no longer living in the Industrial Revolution, as you know, what I've talked about was happening in the 19th century. We have wave after wave of innovation. Innovation is happening with ever-increasing speed, acceleration. We don't even know what the future is going to hold in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. We just don't know. So we have to really be ready for that. We have to understand the importance of how we see and read the world. We have to be attuned to it. And what's interesting to me, being director of an art organization, is really my pain in the way that people don't see art as being important. They don't see visual culture. They don't see aesthetics as something to be concerned with. And that's something that's happened really since the era I've talked about. It's become entertainment. And meanwhile, people who know, people who are smart, know that aesthetics is really important. Putin's chief advisor was a conceptual artist and has constructed Putin's image, his regime, his power, through the use of imagery. Breitbart in the US, the right-wing think tank, understands this also, because they say very clearly, politics is downstream from culture. They know if you construct culture first, you can then start to manipulate the system beyond that. AI is starting to read the world without us. It's starting to see. John Ruskin talks very clearly about the purpose of art is to see the world clearly in order to act ethically in it. We now have various sort of deep fakes that we're now reading, and we see in the news even now the problematics with X, formerly known as Twitter, not necessarily representing the world, but being read as a way to see the world. So the thing for me, the thing institutions like ZKM, universities, all of us really have to consider very carefully how we construct a world, an operating system around us that works for us. Some global players, such as Apple, know how to do this. They create a story. Primarily, Apple is a storytelling company. It makes products, it has services, but essentially it is the story to which people subscribe. They know how this works. In the car industry, the German motor industry made a significant breakthrough in the 1980s by realizing this also, that they sold an idea, that they sold a product. Interestingly, Ford now makes more money from financing of loans to buy cars than it does from actually making cars. This is the world we're now operating in. But what about the actual detail? What about when you go beyond the surface? This is a holiday photo from a week ago. I was in the Alps, and I've not been for a long time. I was pretty shocked by the devastation caused by climate change. That the glaciers they're virtually gone. They're hardly there anymore, and it's a very shocking sight. So we have to think about how we actually see beyond this. How do we tell this story in order to make and act ethically in the world? This is a map I use quite a lot. It's quite interesting. Basically, it's the undersea cables that connect the World Wide Web. This is the old plumbing. And it is actually old plumbing, because if you look at it, it's actually a picture of the colonial trade routes from the 19th century and the 18th century. But this is the main service hubs for the internet. But it's still the old world, and the world isn't like this anymore. What is quite interesting is that something else is happening, is that this is a map of the use of open source mapping software in South America, Africa, Asia. What you see here is a redistribution of knowledge. You see a redistribution of making, of people using technology for their own ends from the ground up. And I think this is maybe a point of interest in our world now, and a point of interest to be noticed, and certainly a point of interest for me in ZKM, that we start to see people using technology for their own ends, of the making and doing with digital media. This is a project by a community in the Amazon with an artist, Paulo Tavares, where they are working with bioscientists and aerial photography and heat mapping to show the changes in plant formation that gives evidence of where traditional settlements were for them to buy back land rights. This is in Manchester. This is a project I was involved with the university in the Department of Dermatology, where all dermatology students learn art as a core part of their curriculum, because by being visually attuned to reading the world and reading images, they become better diagnosticians for skin diseases. They can identify patterns, they can see very, very clearly, and better than the AI models that are currently in use. We can use paintings to study climate change. plantation workers in the Congo can also use art as a way to act in the world. Here they've created an NFT from a traditional sculpture that was stolen from them by the plantation owners and now lives in the Museum of Virginia Fine Arts. And they're now selling these NFTs of the sculpture to raise the funds to buy back the land in order to farm it themselves. Winnie Soon, a Chinese artist, but also an activist, is using artificial intelligence and machine learning to show and demonstrate very clearly the censorship that the Chinese government is undertaking to remove certain words, certain phrases, certain actions on the web in China. Robot engineers in Mexico City, this is Fernando Palma from a kind of collective of robot engineers in Mexico City, is using this for campaigns against the government to gain back land rights, but also as a way to educate engineers in Mexico City to create their own economy around robotics rather than all going over the border into Silicon Valley where they're being headhunted. And even communities such as these communities from British Columbia are using machine learning in storytelling in order to save their indigenous languages, to have their languages out there on the web. And collectives like Forensic Architecture, of a kind of collective of engineers, games designers, lawyers, scientists, are using basically visualization techniques to show the pollution in the Mississippi Valley to prevent the building of factories that are making it the most toxic place on Earth. Or Richard Moss, a photographer who is using Kodak infrared film developed for military use to show the devastation in the Amazon in very clear images and very clear pictures. So these are just examples of people working in very small, specific places on specific projects with artfulness, with science, and combining them together. And I think what's interesting now is that we have the facility, the ability to connect all these things together. It's no longer that New York, Paris, Chicago, Shanghai are the centers of development of what's happening in the world. The answers aren't all there anymore. The answers are completely around the world. They're redistributing, they're reshaping, reforming. So what I'm really calling for is an appetite to connect these small places, these small stories, these ideas, and to create a different kind of economy which isn't centralized but is redistributed. And is thinking really about how we govern the planet rather than how we govern our city. Thank you very much. Is that it? Okay.
Please stay. Yeah. Thank you very much for this very artistic articulation of what we often conceptualize. You said science, art, and technology, but beyond this slogan-ish statement, I thought it was really inspiring. And I think we have a bit of time for Q&A or comments. Yeah.
So, first, yeah, we have a few questions, comments, and so first, thank you very much for this, well, inspiring talk. I have lots of thoughts now, but the thing that really makes me most busy in my head now is we have to reconquer how the communication path with society in a way, you know, because what I saw, what you mentioned with Ruskin in the 19th century in UK, is that they were looking for the direct communication with society, with the real world, you know, and we had this also during this conference that we have to come out of our ivory tower and you know, being just scientists and so, and as a ZKM chair, director, how can you get the people there? And because you were talking about it, but I mean, because, you know, TV is still so strong, new media. Do we need that also? How can we do that? Because, I mean, of course we want that and we need it to save our planet. But do we have the right communication pathways already?
No, we don't. We don't. I mean, obviously, what's happening, we see there's a polarization happening in the world. You know, we've seen it in the last 10 years that's created by the technology we're, you know, all using. Because the algorithms are sending us into our silos. And I see, I mean, it's my wish is that public institutions like ZChem or KIT should be the convening spaces for people, where you meet people and ideas you don't normally meet. And it creates that cognitive diversity that's, as I see it, really fundamental to creating a healthy ecology in natural terms, but also in socioeconomic terms. So I think we need to find ways to encourage people to come together. So I see a challenge, for example, for me at ZChem, it's a huge institution, it's a very public institution, it has lots of people who come and visit it, but it could have so many more. And I think we need to create experiences and invitations for people to come and meet. And through those processes of coming and meeting, you start to change the software. But really, you kind of need that convening for these things to take place and for people to be involved and actually realize, as I was, I suppose, trying to articulate, the power of making and doing. Because I think what's happening increasingly is that people are not making and doing anymore. I think that's the struggle. It's not just in art, but also in science. I remember a professor of physics talking to me a year ago when I kind of launched an education program, and he said, "Can you please teach all my students how to draw? Because you can't be a physicist if you can't visualize. You cannot do it." But they come as physics students and they have no competence in visuality. So I think we need to start making this. We need to reintegrate the arts and sciences back together again, in a really kind of joyful but purposeful way. So I think it's about changing behaviors as well. And what my one hope is that what you also see with increasing technology and mobile phones and is all stuck to our screens is that accentuates the appetite for physical experiences. It doesn't make it go away. People still want to share. They want to go to concerts. They want to go to festivals. They want to be with other people. They want to go eating and dining. So I think through those processes, I think we can build a more educative process.
And if I may just have a second short question on it, because what you showed us is that actually the people who were driven by the desire to make this communication possible, it's not just they invited the others to come, but they created spaces, they created new spaces. So yeah. Are you thinking also about creating new co-spaces, like for dining together, for doing things together? I mean, not just going to sport events or something, but because that was just daily life, and you said it didn't work out, but that was their spirit. So we need new communication pathways, and not just inviting the others, but creating new spaces, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I certainly wouldn't build a new ZChem. I think the age of building new buildings has got. We have to think in a green way, but we can repurpose our buildings. I think that's the thing. And I'm very interested in I've done it historically with museums I've directed before. Is you say, well, we make the rules about what this place is. And so, I've had, communal dining, which I think I will introduce to ZChem. I've ordered some tables already for a long table in the main foyer of ZChem, where people, they come and they meet and they talk together. From scientists, artists, students, school children, the mayor, whoever it is, they all come together. And it's making those experiences count. In Manchester, I turned one of the galleries into a health centre for children from ages 0 to 5. And this had an amazing effect to deliver child monitoring 0 to 5 with clinicians. And they found that it was better to do this in an art gallery than it was to do in a hospital, because they were working with the art collections rather than plastic toys in analysis of child development. So it does work, but you just have to break the rules a little bit to change the spaces.
So my last comment is, if you look over there, but it was not prepared, I wouldn't make this on purpose, but this is his new space over there to discover mathematics. Maybe you have seen it during this week. There are children from 0 to 5, not 0, but they were just working on mathematics physically. They're touching objects to learn mathematics. I think we need more of that also. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Well, thank you very much. It was exciting, and I agree, of course, that science and arts have to come closer. But don't you think that you have an additional important role? The society today is, of course, bombed with problems, with crisis. People are possibly scared because they don't know what future will come. Shouldn't the artists be a solution for such problems of normal people, not non-scientific people? Shouldn't ZKM or other museums more or less allow normal people to understand better the emotional way that the artists would like to help society, possibly to circumvent the problems and be more optimistic towards a very unknown future?
Yeah, yes, I agree. And I could talk more about basically the areas of art I'm interested in. I talk a lot and get into trouble historically quite a lot in some art historical contexts. So I'm interested in art that's useful. I really am. I think the idea of art's not, there's a whole story here that belongs to Immanuel Kant and philosophy and things, why art is seen as useless, but it's not. We all do things for very specific reasons. And for me, if we work with artists to do things that actually benefit people in the day-to-day, then people really understand it for what it does for them, not what they're told it's doing. Or you know, there's a history where you go, if you look at this painting, it's really good for you. This is kind of like the classical last 200 years of art. Go to an art gallery and look at this painting, and you will become a better person. But actually, if you work with artists to imbue artistic thinking in daily life, like cooking or feeding or creating architecture or design or creating new systems, then people go, oh yes, I can see what this is doing for me. I don't need to understand it. I don't need to be told why this is important or interesting. I can sense it and feel it myself because I can see and feel the transformation. So yes, I absolutely agree with you, in short.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. And I really liked your example where you show that in Manchester, physician students have to learn art. And I think this is probably an example which could also work for scientists here at the KIT or other places, that this is probably art should be part of the PhD curriculum, for instance, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I tried to, when I was in Manchester, I was head of the city cultural education policy unit. And I was really there advocating for the idea that we don't teach art in the schools anymore as a subject, that you use art in all subjects, in history, in physics, in chemistry, as a way of learning. And that way it doesn't become something separate. It becomes, you know, you learn about aesthetics and visualization in physics or in mathematics. Mathematics is patterns. You know, if we changed our education system so that we embedded artistic, and I don't mean like artistic genius, I mean just artistic competence, aesthetic visual competence in all subjects, then I think that would have quite a transformational impact on what happens to people as they develop. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was very, very enlightening and very interesting. So what I want to ask is that there is this notion of art being for the rich or being most accessible to the rich. So how do you, and obviously art education is important, but then it's sort of, when you come to the society and you come to the working section of the society, you have people who enjoy art, who are for whom the art is most accessible, the rich, and the ones who are just never, who are there to just look at it, like look at maybe Michelangelo's David and be happy with it, and that's it. And you don't know anything, you don't appreciate that. So how do you sort of decouple appreciation of art from the class divide? Or like, how do you make it as accessible as possible, that not just in the sphere of education, but in the real society as well, where the working people also want to appreciate art, also want to contribute to art?
Yeah, it's a big problem, because we've had this ingrained in us for 200 years. You know, there's another story from the 19th century where this idea as art for the 1% begins, where it slowly it goes to galleries and museums. Art becomes decoupled from society in the 19th century. It's no longer craft, design, architecture, people, you know, religion, ritual, festival. It becomes its own thing and ends up in museums and on white walls and sold, and a market is created. And you know, the story of how that has happened is sort of like, you know, a bit like watching a train crash, really. But in a way, it's a big thing to undo. But I think why I think kind of Zeghem is quite interesting is because it's not Michelangelo and Picasso and these names that some people know and some people don't. It's digital technology, it's visuality, it's science. So you in a way you can start, I think you can start to rebuild people's relationships and say, you're actually already doing art. People are doing, I mean, Zeghem was founded in 1988 when media arts was a new thing. Digital culture was a new thing. Now everybody makes media arts. We have an attachment in our hands and in our pockets that we use all the time, which is a visual device. And I think you have to remind people that they're already doing art. Yes, of course, there's that stuff which is things that sell for $50 million. And of course, and you can still appreciate art. You can still do all that, but art is much more than that. And I think it's about reminding people and encouraging people that you don't need to be a great artist to be an artist. You don't need to be successful. You don't need to go to a gallery or museum to see the original. You can think about art in a very different way, and that's why for me education is so important, because if we start to teach that from year zero, rather than try and change the software when you're 30 years old, then it's a lot easier that way.
So thank you very much
for
this inspiring.
Okay, thank you.
And also, thank you very much, everyone, for this inspiring discussion. When we talked about how society come together on the macro level, it really made me think then on the individual level, what makes some people get more curious about this huge challenge and therefore engage, as opposed to shut down because the problem looks so large. So this is something that I would love to discuss with all of you. Now, we will move to the second presentation by Dr. Christian Büscher, who is a researcher at the Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis here at KIT. Christian, floor is yours.
So, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to a, for me, very new topic. I'm a sociologist at heart and by training. However, I will pick up an idea from economists, wrap it up in sociology again, and present it as an idea for interdisciplinary work. This is the whole idea, and the title is Risk Governance in Carbon Dioxide Removal Services as a Global Means of Mitigating Climate Change Effects. So we know by now that civilization has become very efficient in harvesting useful energy and matter, using this, building technology and social structures, and becoming more and more efficient. And every step of efficiency has resulted in using even more energy and matter. This has become a problem because of emissions and else. One of the main reasons for this is the internal structure of modern society. So we find subsystems which have become very good in what they do. They serve different functions. One of the functions actually is art, as we heard today, but one of the major functions is politics and economics and law and science. And these systems have become very efficient in their doings, but they are quite autonomous. And the problem is, we cannot think in any kind of hierarchy, that politics is on the top of society and can control everything else. I think we have to embrace an idea of a structural drift of society, which is going in a direction of very unsustainable ways. So these social systems are actually operating in the boundaries of our ecosphere, and economics has become very, very influential, increasing the level of human activities immensely over the last decades. The reason for this is the invention of specific social mechanisms called success media: power, money, normative law, true knowledge, and else. And the basic function of these media is to make something improbable more probable. So here's the relation to entropy as well. And these social mechanisms are very much ingrained in modern society, and they can't switch on or off to our liking. It's impossible. So what can we do? We have to use them. This refers to the question of how can we answer to the problem we face today in this kind of modern society. So as Niklas Luhmann told us some 40 years ago, the economy of society is only reacting to price signals. But if there are price signals, the economy will react. This is very important. So we're coming down now from a very broad perspective to a more narrow perspective. So global risk governance, we know about taxation already. Polluter pays, direct or indirect taxations. They work more or less efficient in some areas. In some regions they work efficient, in others they do not. This is called the STIC, the social costs of carbon model. Economists now claim we need the other side as well. The carrot. It's called the risk cost of carbon model. And as we know that carbon dioxide removal is now integral part of science and future politics, I guess. It will be very important, although it's very disputed. And there is the idea of creating a reward of mitigation services, for mitigation services. And this should be financed via a new currency, a complementary currency for climate change called 4C. This is invented by economists I will cite later, and they have the idea this currency could possibly motivate certain activities, useful activities. So we are talking about negative emissions, which will become very important in the future. However, there is a huge concern about moral hazards that if we concentrate on negative emissions, we do not concentrate anymore on avoiding emissions. So this is a very important discussion, but we leave it out today just for the sake of the argument. Negative emissions. The dimensions of the problem. So in the factual dimension, the CO2 equivalent removal, we need technical innovations, which are right now very much hypothetical, which are disputed and contested because of their viability, effectiveness, costs, and so on. We need technical norms and standards worldwide. We need means to observe the success of the removal. It's very important. Then we need to align the motivation of all actors involved. There's the sociology coming in. The interaction between those who issue a new currency and those who will seek it. And there must be agencies which can, in a legitimate way, certificate the success of removal. And also, it's a temporal problem. This is a long-term effort. So somebody has to invest money and effort to get paid later, in years later, without having any kind of guarantee of success. So this notion of absorbing uncertainty coming from organizational theory is very important. There must be mechanisms to absorb the uncertainty to come into action. So all in all, in this whole arrangement, there must be trust in a system, in a new regime. So the motivation, where is it coming from? The outlook is future payment. So money as a symbolically generalized media of communication is increasing the likelihood of certain interactions which are important. In this case, it's exchange. And that without determining what, when, by whom, or why this exchange is done. So this must be very open. It must be open for ideas and innovation, and all kind of moral discussions should be excluded here to make it efficient. So the focus of accepting a price or not, payment or non-payment, this is the code of modern economy. It is simple and it's forceful, as Schumpeter said. So this complementary currency for climate change, Dalton Chen, Joel van der Beek, and Jonathan Cloud, they came up with these ideas, should be issued by central banks globally. There must be a limitation of exchange. It's only an exchange possible later into fiat money, in dollars, in yen, in euros. It's tradable as a currency as such, but not as a carbon offset, as we see in certificates. There's no exchange with third parties, and there must be a variable exchange rate due to the success of carbon removal. The problem is the ecosphere is already, in some cases, treated as scarce, like land and soil and water, as we heard yesterday. But the atmosphere is not, actually. This is a huge problem. So money must serve in some kind of substitution as a symbol. In a way, what is important about if we talk about money, it detaches the desired interaction from all altruistic motives. This becomes important later because of morality as a big hindrance for economic interactions. And money serves as a safe for potential future activities. So you can store this kind of money, this new currency, for future innovative activities. This is very important. But the paradox still remains, how do you keep something scarce which has been created in the first place? So it's some kind of artificial scarcity you need. So the idea, and now it's getting very complicated, and this is not my area of expertise, but I try anyway. The idea quantitative easing comes from is a financial tool in financial crisis, has been used 2008 and 2009, flooding the market with a lot of money, in the hope that this money will be used for new investments. So the central banks created money out of nothing, in a sense. So we need for this new currency some kind of institutional backing, and the assets are, for example, the reserves, which are allocated by the International Monetary Fund, and there are special drawing rights, which central banks can use to issue money. We need a limitation of this currency, and this limitation must be related to the carbon budget we have left. So this is an issue for natural scientists who can determine how much carbon we can emit in the next years or decades. And also, you have to ask yourself, when does the currency apply? Only in cases where activities are coming above something which has been committed already. So there is a register of nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, and only activities above this level will be rewarded with this new currency. This is the idea from the economists. So you see in this whole arrangement a lot of political contingencies. And then you have this moral problem. There needs to be an ethical reflection on, should we pay those who already gained the rights to drill for oil and gas and coal? These are committed emissions already, and they are very dangerous. And we could think about paying those who have the rights to leave it in the ground. I think most of you will disagree, say this is morally wrong, but maybe we have to think about, do we want to be on the moral high ground, or do we want to save the planet? So it's an ethical discussion we need here at this place. So in summary, for me, it's kind of a plausible means of global governance. Money is always the simplification of motives. It does not slow down human activities, actually, but it will redirect these activities possibly in the right direction. And it's very much in alignment with system theory in sociology, in economics and climate research models. And hopefully it will be some kind of motivation for colleagues to work on this problem together. I think this is very exciting for all kinds of disciplines, because it's a huge project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. Now we have, yes, some time for a Q&A, so I would like to take questions and comments from you, and please stay for Q&A. So, thank you very much for this nice presentation. And I tend to say half jokingly, why do we do personal finance, so budgeting of things and reviewing of our spreadsheet relatively well? I mean, for some not so well, but relatively well. But we can't do that with carbon. So why can't we budget it, right? And I think you pointed out that this notion of scarcity has to be in our mind or in our governance. And now, if I think about credit card, so in some countries, credit card debts are a serious problem. And that means money or credit itself doesn't solve the problem, but there needs to be some enforcement, credit enforcement. And shifting our focus to our carbon issue. How well are we doing this enforcement right now? Or how could we do it better? Do you see my point?
No. I'm sorry. But yeah. I can say one thing. The stick and the carrot, they have to work together. So the stick has to be in place. It must be very forceful. And the stick in your case is you have to pay a lot of money for your credit card debts. So there is already a mechanism in place. But maybe there's no stick in terms of how do we get people to stop buying too many things on their credit card. So the other side of the motivation is lacking, maybe. Maybe this could be an answer to your question. I don't know.
Yeah, that was my question.
So stick and carrot, both important.
I just wonder what kind of governance system or organization of actors can actually enforce it? So, and who is it, what is it? Can we make it work? So that was my question.
I don't know yet. Therefore, we need an interdisciplinary project to, because there are a lot of open questions, of course. But this is kind of an idea which is not grounded in morality, in saying people how to behave better. It's kind of a mechanism which is very forceful, which might motivate it globally actors to steer their activities in a direction of carbon removal, be it technical means, be it geological means, as we heard yesterday, be it agricultural means, nature-based means. There are a lot of ideas floating around, and I think it would be very interesting, and it's also viable for poorer countries and smaller actors. It's not about corporations, it's about millions and millions and millions of people who can work on their soil to remove carbon. So it's kind of a global regime which does not address large, huge corporations, but all actors. So this is one step in this direction.
Thank you.
Actually, my question was also who would steer the whole thing. And because the question was asked now and you said you have no answer right away, I will make a comment out of it, but I want to make the comment. Because you had entropy on your first slide, and though people who know me know that I have worked a lot on the biography of Rudolf Clausius, who was actually the discoverer, I would say, of entropy, not the inventor, the discoverer. And he was a very bright person. And I mean, simply in 1850, having the insight that there is not just, there's this energy conversion going on in steam engine and so on, I just don't want to talk too much about it. But 35 years later, he made a very important talk when he was rector of the University of Bonn, which was actually the German Oxford then, so to say. So all the noble guys went to Bonn, not to Karlsruhe or to Berlin. And it was called über die Energievorräte der Natur und ihre Verwendung zum Nutzen der Menschheit, on the energy resources of nature and their use for the benefit of mankind. And I mean, he was a theorist and working in mathematics, but this is printed, and he proposes that we have to look at the resources of nature because they are not infinite, and so how to govern worldwide the use of these resources. And he takes the example of coal because he says we live in a fantastic time because energy supply is just everywhere, but it will be ending at some point. No. And in the end, he poses exactly this question: how can we, as humanity, steer this whole process? That was in 1885, and I was so impressed that this physicist, mathematician, he came to exactly your point that we have to steer it, and we have to have these value things. He compares, for example, the steering with the post system that was then established worldwide. And so my feeling is that maybe the World Bank also could help, because I don't see that just policy. I'm careful a bit now, but would you not also think that it should come maybe from economy in a way?
Oh, from economy itself, no. I don't see any outlook which is positive in this way, other than the currency exists and there will be motivation to earn money. And maybe then the sentence "greed is good" comes to fruition again. I don't know. But this is very complicated with the central banks as a major player in this idea. They are there to protect their own economies first. But I think you will see very devastating events in the future, some kind of catastrophes. And I think this is the only stimulus for politics to get into action. I think it will be very much regional, like India, China. If they have the heat wave events, they will start geoengineering, I guess. And then maybe other people will wake up. The Americans, if Arizona is having a power outage, nobody can survive in Arizona, actually. And they have the same problem. They will start geoengineering, and maybe politics, global politics, comes to its senses and sees the danger if local politics, nation politics starts with experiments like this. And maybe this kind of regime is proposed and comes into operation. There must be some, I have to say, I'm very sad about this, but there has to be some catastrophe, I guess. Otherwise, we will not act. I think some of you have seen the movie Don't Look Up. The critics hated the movie, but the scientists all said, yeah, this is the point, this is how it goes. So, but I think we have to work on it. And KIT is very much able to work on such a topic because we have all the researchers here. So this is also a proposal to my colleagues, if somebody are here, I don't know.
Yes, I try to do it very quick. What you propose is basically, again, using money or monetary incentives to align what is individually good, or what I see as good for me, with what is good for society. And I mean, with a stick, we tried this for 30 years and basically failed. So what makes you thinking that this now would succeed? Or are we back in another 30 years saying this failed again?
I can't see in the future. What I can see is that it didn't work, as you said, the stick, because politics is not rigorous enough with the stick. And this idea from the economists, it's not my idea, I just have done a kind of an interpretation, is interesting because it aligns to the old idea from social systems theory that we have to look at the functional systems and see how they work and see what mechanisms are relevant, and we have to address these mechanisms. And they have done it with the money mechanism. And this is far more forceful and effective than any kind of moral discussion. You know, telling people, don't do it, doesn't work. So my hope is, let's see, my curiosity is to see if this might be a viable option in the future. I don't know if it works. Sorry, I can't give answers today, but a lot of ideas. Hopefully this helps.
So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Büscher. And thank you everyone for this discussion. I saw a couple more hands, but we have to move on. And so please use the coffee break to continue this wonderful discussion. Our next plenary talk is by Mr. Nikas Scheidt here. He is a PhD candidate here at KIT in the chair of economic policy. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Katschi, and I'm glad to be able to present today here at this session within the KIT Science Week. Now, this was actually a great handover because when we talk about who can do this, who can implement all these, let's say, regulations, these sticks and carrots, we will see potentially we are thinking one of the main bodies that can do this is international institutions. So let me talk about my research that is about institutional and technological drivers of renewable energy deployment today. Okay, this does not seem to work, so do I? No, it works. At this conference so far, we have seen many different approaches as to how can we tackle the climate crisis. Our talk today is about really looking a bit further on the macro level and going into abstract terms and looking at two of the main factors that so far have contributed to furthering at least the energy transition towards lower reliance on fossil fuels. This work has been developed jointly with the Technical University of Darmstadt and is part of the Clean Circuits project. We factor in these two factors because institutions so far have been the global governing space for driving solutions to mitigate climate change, whereas technology has been the source for climate change. I'm not going to say that word correctly. But they may also pose solutions for us to tackle this. When we look at institutions and technology, we of course can look at many different proxies for this, but what we decided to focus on was international environmental cooperation in the form of international environmental agreements. And when we look at technology, most commonly people measure renewable energy innovations. And we're asking this question whether these two factors have been able to further the deployment of renewable electricity generation as a proxy for renewable energy. We furthermore asked the question whether there have been any development dependencies in this sort of relationship. A bit more on the details of, first of all, international environmental agreements. When we look at the effectiveness of environmental agreements, what comes to mind is, of course, well, we take these specific agreements, like everybody knows the Paris Agreement or the Kyoto Protocol, and we ask the question of how effective have these been in mitigating climate change, what were the goals, and did the countries comply to these goals? And that's, of course, a valid perspective. What we are, however, arguing is that beyond the direct effect, there is a wider, more spillover-oriented effect. In that the more countries participate in these agreements, the more they benefit from being embedded in this network of international environmental cooperation. This might lead to benefits in terms of network effects, trade effects, building up knowledge stock, trust stocks, and so far and so forth. This has been rather unexplored. In fact, there has not been a single analysis that looks at international environmental agreements like this. When we further want to examine development dependencies in this field, we would, for now, argue that, well, mostly when we look at numbers of environmental agreements, we see that developed countries usually are more committed to them and thus will likely benefit a bit more strongly from participating in these IEAs. So that's the first part. The second part, when we look at technological development, again, as with IEAs, most studies seem to focus on a subset or a single technology and see, well, did these diffuse into the market? Did we see any effects of these technologies? And did they lead, for example, to a higher share of renewable energy? In the same vein as with international environmental agreements, we argue there's effect beyond that, in that they increased renewable energy technology portfolio, of course, leads to higher capitals and stores of knowledge, skills, and technology that are, in the end, beneficial for furthering the energy transition. When we look here at development dependencies, a large body of the literature argues, well, most of these most important technologies are developed in developed countries, whereas developing countries should rely on technology transfer. Now, this is, of course, debatable, and first studies have shown that less developed countries are also more than capable in developing these technologies. So we do still expect that there's a higher effectiveness in developed countries, though. And lastly, of course, both these factors interact with each other. So when countries increasingly participate in environmental cooperation, they will likely benefit from knowledge sharing, from technology sharing and technology development. Whereas if countries have higher, let's say, stores of technology development, they have an easier time in implementing these agreements. So we expect both effects to reinforce each other. Okay, now I'm already going to jump into the less interesting part probably that you can probably not even read that well, so I'm just going to tell you quickly. We try to really zoom back and get as much data as possible on these effects and really employ a data set that covers countries in all regions and across all income levels. So we quickly try to find the best source for international environmental agreements, which is the International Environmental Agreements Database Project. And in order to really make an assessment of the stock of countries' participation in these agreements, we went back all the way to 1950 and tried to see in how many of these agreements are in effect since then, while also removing terminations. With technology, the most common measurement of technology innovations are patents. So we simply took a stock of countries' patent applications in this field, mostly related to renewable energy generation. We are unfortunately limited to 2019, so we have to go a bit back in time. But I mean, future studies can expand on that. Lastly, what's the outcome? Renewable energy deployment. Unfortunately, the data here is not very broad, so we use the proxy of renewable electricity in order to gain a stock of a lot of countries and gain a larger data set. This led to us compiling a data set of 152 countries worldwide between 1992 and 2017. We also added a few controls, you know, the standard stuff, economic development, trade intensity, fossil fuel prices, some political factors, some population factors, and resource dependency. Before I jump already into the results, let me quickly tell you the method. It was a simple regression model with some country-level fixed effects, where we entered both patents and IEAs separately and then jointly, and also tried to measure the interaction. And as for measuring development dependencies, we focused on OECD membership, as this gives a more broad perspective than purely development by income. And for causality's sake, we lagged all the independent and control variables by 1 year. Let me quickly jump into the data. Now, when we look at renewable electricity over time, the trend is clearly upwards, although it's still, on average, okay, no laser pointer, on average it's about 10 to 20%, depending on which country you are at. There are some vast differences in trends as in levels. I think the most interesting case here is Nicaragua, who started with high levels, then decreased because of investments into fossil fuels, and then used a lot of investments again to invest in wind and geothermal energy. So there's a lot to unravel here, of course, as one wants to have a deeper look. When we look into membership into IEAs, we see that the clear governing bodies are European countries who are at the forefront. However, across all countries, basically, membership has leveled off over time, especially in recent years. Lastly, when we look at patent applications, same story, but just the leveling off happened a bit earlier in the 2010s. This is currently being investigated, but the main argument is that the main renewable energy technologies, you all know them, solar, wind, they have rather matured, and a lot of focus nowadays is on developing storage solutions, transport solutions, digitization, so far and so forth. So a lot of interesting trends to unravel. Okay, let's jump into the results. Those of you who don't know how regressions work, stars, when there's stars next to the numbers, there's an effect. When there's no stars, there's likely, we can't prove that there's an effect, and the sign determines whether the effect is negative or positive. I'm not going to tell you all of these different results. That's not that interesting. So let's jump into the most important results, that of the explanatory variables. In the main model, overall, all countries included, we do find both patents and IEAs have a consistent and positive effect. What does this mean? Well, as we argued, there are likely some spillover effects of participating in these IEAs beyond just simply fulfilling the goals that are being set there. Similarly, for patents, there must be, or it seems that there is a link between developing these patents over time and really reaching environmental targets, in this case, renewable energy deployment. So this is likely proven to some extent. We do also see this interaction effect that was mentioned before. So we can argue that likely these two effects reinforce each other. And that's, I guess, a good story, knowing that countries that are likely engaging in these agreements will hopefully also engage in knowledge sharing and trading. Okay, let's look at the results separately for OECD and non-OECD countries. Again, I'm not going to bore you with the boring statistic parts, but just tell you a bit about the results that we find. Again, consistently positive effects. Now, for the IEAs, again, that's perhaps not too unexpected, so engaging in international environmental cooperation is positive for OECD and non-OECD countries. Similarly, developing patents for OECD countries leads to positive outcome. Not very surprising. What is perhaps surprising is that also non-OECD countries do benefit from developing these patents. They have less patents, yes, but these patents seem to have some kind of effect in driving the energy transition in these countries. So this goes against the notion that we have seen before in the literature and should definitely be investigated further after this paper. Okay, these are the main results. Of course, as any good study, we did a bunch of robustness tests. So when we split the sample, for example, by income rather than by OECD countries, we do see that the group of high-income countries has a more ambiguous effect for IEAs. A lot of oil states are in the high-income country league, so that might explain the reason why. When we look at, for example, another differentiation for international environmental agreements, focusing mainly on those within the climate lineage, we do see that this is especially beneficial for non-OECD countries, so they have benefited more from this lineage. And lastly, we wanted to look a bit deeper into the effect of non-OECD countries. So was this solely because they developed patents together with OECD countries, you know, these development dependencies? But when we do filter out all of those patents that have been registered jointly with companies or individuals from OECD countries, the effect still stands. So it really shows that non-OECD countries are more than capable to lead these patents into their energy mix. Bunch of other robustness checks, IEA variation and other controls and so far. The only effect that was somewhat different was when we included national climate lawmaking, which was significantly interacting with all the other effects of ours, but it took away the explanatory power of international environmental cooperation for developed countries, interestingly. Okay, what does this all mean? We do find that both technology and institutions can drive the deployment of renewable energy and increase the share of renewable electricity. Do not be mistaken, we do not in any way claim that this is a big effect, that this has been enough so far, or that this is the only effect that there is. But we do learn a bit more on how to advance the global energy transition on this level, hopefully. As with any study, we have a bunch of limitations. This is an aggregate analysis. We don't know too much about the intricacies of these links that we have made, so future studies can expand on this. Of course, the proxy of renewable electricity had to be there. We, of course, would like to use other effects of environmental protection and environmental outcomes. And this, of course, warrants further analyses in this effect. Lastly, as we mentioned, the effectiveness of patents in non-OECD countries, I think that opens the door for a lot of new discussions in the field. This was all about the research paper. This was, of course, developed with the help of many others who have been engaged in this project, even outside of the standard offer list. So we would like to thank all of them. And I would like to thank you for your attention. Feel free to ask questions or contact me after this presentation or write me an email. Thank you very much.
Please stay for Q&A.
Yes.
So thank you very much for tackling this fundamental problem of whether international agreements are effective. So now we, again, have time for questions and comments. Please feel free to raise your hand.
Thanks for the interesting talk. Maybe I have a question about the curve of the patents you showed, because they seem to show an S-curve, which is indicating market adoption. So they enter into an exponential phase. I was wondering if the deployment of renewable energy might just follow a few years later after these patents have been issued. So we might see more deployment in the coming years, but we haven't seen them yet.
Thank you very much for this question, a relevant question indeed. Of course, it could potentially follow the S-curve, but current research argues that the technology is way too mature for new innovations in the field. What could happen is related innovations might go up, like in storage and transport, which has been kind of the main problem of renewables in terms of technical solutions. So while these technologies specifically will likely not see an upturn, related technologies will likely, at least in theory. And
so you think there's limited upscale potential?
I'm not sure. I think this is a question that I can't answer in particular. But I'm hoping, let's say that. As for your second part, absolutely there's a time lag between patenting and deployment and effects, which we are also arguing, of course. We do have a time lag of 1 year. We used other time lags of up to 5 years. The results weren't particularly different. But we do see an effect. So hopefully increased efforts in this field will indeed lead to increased deployment over time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this interesting presentation. My question is, did you explicitly not address storage solutions in the, so they were not part of the deployment, energy storage, or were they considered in this analysis?
Thank you very much for this question. They were, but unfortunately we can't cover all energy storage, just the one specifically related to renewable energy. But the field of energy storage in general is increasing quite a lot, which is not covered particularly well by the patents in this field.
So yeah, just a follow-up question. So maybe some effects, some delay effects could be due to the fact that there were energy barriers, energy storage barriers that were not addressed in the analysis. So there might be a correlation just delayed because of the deployment delay on these energy solutions, which always lag behind. So just a hypothesis.
Yes, like the previous commenter mentioned, of course there is a delay and we don't deny it, but the fact that we do see an effect means that, well, there is a delay, but it's not significant enough to deter the effect. Thank you very much.
Hi. Did you also control or look at if at the same time maybe renewable energies are more used, but then also more non-renewable energies are used in the same state? Because as we heard in the former talk, the more effective we use energy, the more energy we are actually using. So I was wondering if you check for kind of phase-out project, or at the contrary, more non-renewable energy sources are being used alongside.
Thank you for the question. Now, I didn't mention this because I was kind of zooming through it quickly, but we do use the relative share of renewable electricity. So an increase in that share basically means that fossil fuels, at least for electricity, have to go down. So it's not in any way related to scaling up energy usage. So it's just a relative effect.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's a more a remark or a comment on that. I would like to point out that looking on patents is not a good measure to understand the implementation of new technologies in reality. So from a patent, there's a long way to TRL 7, 8, 9, and 10. There must be a business case for that thing. So, I mean, I know we all speak about patents to compare the situation between different countries, but this is not really a well-suited indicator. That's just my comment on it. Look for the implementation, look for the companies who are investing money in certain technologies. This is much more explaining how, for example, renewable energy technologies are being used in a country.
Thank you very much for the question. Of course, a relevant remark. We all know of the weaknesses of patents, at least does that study them? So I would, in one way, I would agree with you that they come with a lot of weaknesses. On the other hand, I mean, it's not what we are wanting to measure is this build-up of innovations in the field. And when we look at innovations, patents are unfortunately still the most used indicator due to, of course, also their data availability. So when it comes to diffusion of patents, as you mentioned, of course, I would argue that when it comes to market diffusion, that's not what they measure, but that's not what we are measuring either. So I agree in one way with your comment. Thank you very much.